So in addition to the different variable types, or at least the basic variable types that we've talked about in UnrealScript, I also wanted to cover arrays. If you're not familiar with programming or the term array, it's basically a contiguous list of variables that are stored in memory that way, and so they're all in order. And so what that allows you to do is to refer to them by one name, and then you can index into the different elements or indexes in the list. And so it's a really useful concept and used very heavily in programming. And so I wanted to make sure we covered that, but I wanted to cover it sort of after the variable types because an array can be of any variable type. It's more of like a data structure or just a way to store that set of variables. So let's go ahead and put in our heading and show you how to define an array. Okay, so you're going to start out with the same variable keyword. Everything looks the same there, and for this case we're going to do an array of integers. So again, nothing different here than if we were just going to define the integer right here. But where it is different is if we're defining an array, you can add the square braces and then a numeric value inside of that. And so what you have here is, actually we're not going to set this equal to anything. You've defined an array that has 20 elements in it. So if you think about this as a list, then you have 20 integers, in consecutive order, all stored kind of by this one name, and then you can index into them using the same syntax but using a single value, and this starts at 0. So you're defining it as 20 values in this array, or 20 elements, and then those index from 0, starting at 0. So what you're going to have is 0 through 19 are going to be your indexes or indices into that array. We can kind of chart this out. Maybe that'll help visually if we just do a bunch of the square braces. We're not going to go all the way. We'll just do something like this. But basically you have this from a standpoint of indexing into the different elements. Each set of square braces here refers to one integer value. Now these numbers here are not the value that's being put into that integer. What this is syntax would be is if you add that to the myArray name, so you put the name of the variable and then you do say sub2, then what you're actually getting at now is the element at sub2, which is the third in the list. You have 0, 1, 2, and you can set this to a value, and that value could be well, just make it not confusing. We'll just make sure something well different from 2 is 5. So the value, or the integer value in element 3 or 2, it's the third element in the list, but the index value is 2, is now equal to 5. And you can treat this, this syntax right here gives you access to that variable, so you can do arithmetic on it. You can do whatever you would normally do with a variable. But you have this nice collection of them that are all in order, and because they're in consecutive order like this, this allows you to do things like use for loops, or a way that basically a for loop or a while loop, some sort of loop that you can walk the array if you want, starting at 0 and keep checking each value. So a common thing you'll see is to do a for loop. The number of iterations is the number of elements in the array, and you start off, an index at 0, and so you've got that first, element or index into the array, and then you just keep incrementing that by 1 that you normally would in a for loop, but now you're basically walking up the array and, doing either an operation or checking the value of each element, and then at the end of the for loop, you've hit every element in that array, and so, based on whatever context you have, you can break out of the loop, or you'll at least have the information that you need. Okay, so I'm going to erase this right here. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to throw a comment on here, just to be clear. So, again, because you're using a keyword here, this could be any of the variable types you want. My array 2, and this could be 4 bools. So that's confusing naming right there. That should be like array of bools or something like that. But I just want have something to contrast here, that this this is an array of 20 integers, this is an array of 4 Boolean values. So, you could have an array represent your inventory, and you've got, maybe you want to have one that just checks to see whether or not you have the weapon. So if you have weapon slots, 1 through 9, then you could define an array of 9 and then make it a list of bools if you wanted, or an array of bools. And then you could, as you acquire a weapon or pick up a weapon or grant them a weapon in script or, in the game, then you can set that bool to true or false of whether or not they're carrying that. And then, just for simple logic checks where, say, you need to do something, but you need to know whether they have this particular gun. Like, say there's a script or a scripted scenario in the level where they need to use a particular weapon to remove some sort of blockage in the level to proceed. So they need to have the rocket launcher to blow up the wall that or the door that's blocked off, that's keeping them and gating them from where they need to go. Well, in the scripting logic, you might need to run a check and be like, hey, we need to make sure they have the rocket launcher. If not, we need to communicate to them and give them a message and be like, hey, you need to go pick up a rocket launcher. I mean, that's just a simple case, but that's where you might use an array of bools. There's other ways to do that. I mean, you could also just iterate over the array of actual weapons and check to see whether the weapon exists. It depends on what functions the classes that exist, have, or if you need to add something. But it's good to get to kind of the high concept of how this works, and then how you can, iterate over it using a for loop or a while loop and check each of the elements inside of the array. Okay, so it's kind of a lot on arrays, but if it's not something you're familiar with, it's sort of a different concept, so I wanted to make sure that I talked about it at least a little bit. And then as we're going into the future stuff with the classes and some actual examples in the editor and game, then we'll probably be at least referencing arrays, if not creating some new ones.